The saga of the Google anti-diversity memo is by far the best thing that has happened in the realm of the cultural war. No matter how this will end, we, the people in the vast majority of the non-leftist community, win. The only question is, how big will the winning be? Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so by now I assume everyone knows this story, so I won't bother reading articles, although I will leave extensive documentation in the description box for those who did not have the time to follow this controversy. The short version is this: Google sets up an internal communication system to encourage employees to discuss various issues. A Harvard graduate, maybe working as a software engineer with the company, writes a lengthy memo pointing out some realities that 100% of normal people already know, such as that there are inherent biological differences between men and women, the fact that Google is a far-left ideological echo chamber, the fact that affirmative action is discrimination and a cancer per se, and several other hate facts of similar nature. Then someone else leaks the memo to the press and an entire shitstorm ensues. Link to the original memo in the low bar, as well as some examples of the full insanity that followed, including the very mature response by some of the women who work at Google who skipped work because they were triggered after reading the memo. Because, women are just like men, except they can't handle stress just as well and have to run away to mommy when someone dares to utter the truth about disdainful femo-fascist inspired policies. But anyway, the story itself has been covered ad nauseum on various YouTube channels, so I don't have to waste your time with that myself as well. More to the point, Professor Jordan Peterson has an interview up on his channel with this chap, so I'll link to that too, where you get to listen right from the horse's mouth what was the employee's thought process. I have preemptively downloaded the interview just in case the butterfly Googles and Bings over at Google decide to send it down the memory hole. The much more interesting part is the context of the story in the wider cultural sense, because make no mistake, this story is and will be much more relevant than the usual scandals in Silicon Valley. And if the non-left plays its cards right, we can win bigly. But if we do nothing, we still win. Let me explain. First of all, the climate has changed. Not forever or for good, but definitely for the next decade or so, the climate has changed. This is not 2011 anymore or 2013 when I started my audio podcast and received torrents of emails of "You're a sexist, wah wah wah" smirk. This is not even mid-2015 when I started this channel and would still get the occasional progressive whining. In the current year, the climate has changed. Now, that's not to say that the militant progressive ideologues and the paid shills in the false civil society have changed. Those are still there and still the same, but the ecosystem around them has dramatically changed. Even as late as mid-2016, you would still find well-meaning liberals still holding on to disdainful nonsense like diversity, inclusion, and all the rest of the claptrap that we have successfully turned into the butt of all jokes. That has been rapidly changing, and the snowball is already beyond the control of the progressives, and everyone knows that. And while it will take another several years or even a decade of trench warfare until we take back the institutions, the cat is out of the bag and there's no way of putting it back. And I really cannot stress that enough. Those of us who are older in this business remember the times when even printing the word misandry in the cathedral media looked like an insurmountable task. This wasn't that long time ago. I remember when in 2013 we were celebrating the fact that the cathedral had to report that a bunch of non-feminists successfully picketed a venue to cancel a misandrist feminist conference under the same laws that cancelled male-only clubs. I would literally know all the people who opposed feminism, diversity, and other similar crap. We knew each other at least by proxy or by screen name. Nowadays, it is essentially the mainstream view that feminism is cancer, and there are more and more individuals, even on the left, feeling pressured to qualify and defend their statements about feminism, either by claiming they're not that type of feminist or even outright distance themselves from it. Even among leftists is now kosher to say that feminism is toxic. So, under these conditions, the Google scandal comes at a very good moment for us on the non-left and at a highly unfortunate moment for the far leftists inside Google and the cathedral. Because while you could swiftly fire someone over non-PC thought in 2013 and nobody would notice, nowadays everyone notices and most people disagree. Heck, even inside Google, with all of the ideologically enforced echo chamber, still a slight majority of employees either agreed with this guy's points or at the very least felt that it was a needed perspective and definitely not harmful. Links to all of that, of course, in the low bar. Secondly, there are lawsuits on the way. Now, there is on one hand the talk about the initiator of the brouhaha himself, Mr. James Damore, who might indeed have a case for unfair dismissal. On the other hand, there are roughly 60 cackling feminists who are lawyering up for a class action lawsuit against Google, whining about sexism, which I'm very willing to bet right now that it doesn't exist. If there is sexism at Google, that's against men, undoubtedly. The very existence of affirmative action programs is proof in and of itself of sexism and racism. That's just common sense, and everyone knows it. And here's the kicker. No matter what Google does right now, we win. So they fired this guy for having a different opinion, just right after the whole internet read his memo in which he said that different opinions are being suppressed. So they proved him right and in the process triggered a huge PR disaster. From now on, if they get sued by the feminists, they would have to defend themselves in court using essentially James Damore's arguments, which is again a PR mess. If they decide to settle, they will still have to upgrade their policies quietly towards a saner version and in the process signal to other companies to quietly do the same thing. Or go the IBM route, which is to never employ anyone on permanent positions inside the United States and move essentially everything outside the leftist bubble. Either way, we win. Now, if they're sued by James Damore, they'd have to at least attempt to double down on the leftist nonsense, which will make almost any judge laugh his ass off. In case you haven't been paying attention, Trump has quietly been replacing judges at all levels, so the possibility of stumbling upon a social justice warrior judge has slightly gone down lately, and will go down even more by the time this mess gets into court. If they decide to settle with James Damore, then they will definitely upgrade their policies and signal to other companies to do the same to avoid future litigation. Again, we win. So Google is now between a rock and a hard place, and that is fantastic. Moreover, now we'll get a lot more people red-pilled on basic biology, intelligence bell curve on both sexes, the greater male variability theory, and many other hate facts that fundamentally disrupt the whole edifice of diversity, equality, and progress. So even if we do nothing, the forces of the non-left will still score at least a modest victory. But I will argue that not only the forces of the non-left should do something, but that there are also ways to do it. So please hear me out on this. First of all, there is enough evidence that at the very least 1/3 of Googlers agreed with James Damore. Leftists have been able to cuck institutions whilst having only 5% of that institution. With 1/3, there is no excuse not to at least try to orchestrate a takeover. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying it can be done. I gave several examples on my London talk last year with friends and, yes, students of mine who infiltrated into HR offices and turned the progressive nonsense on its head and essentially abolished it. But in order to accomplish this, one needs the will to do it, the patience to do it, and an unshakable understanding that this is a war for the institutions of our civilization. And in a war, morality rules are different. In more plain English, that means being willing to be sneaky, to use agitprop, to use gossip, and any other means necessary to accomplish the goal. The only reason so many places got cucked is because too many good and normal men did nothing, or even worse, believe that it is beneath them to stoop to the level of leftist mudslinging because moral high ground. So that's the first thing that needs to at least be attempted. Secondly, peer pressure. Now, peer pressure is one of the tools that can be used in the takeover attempt as well, but it also has an intrinsic political value by itself. For instance, Susan Wojcicki, YouTube CEO, I don't know if she pronounces her name in the original Polish or not, but anyway, this lady issued a statement that she felt pain at reading the memo. Now, you can read her full statement in the Fortune magazine, which of course links are in the low bar, but in her statement she asks, presumably rhetorically, quote, "For instance, what if we replace the word women in the memo with another group? What if the memo said that biological differences amongst Black, Hispanic, or LGBTQ employees explain their underrepresentation in tech and leadership roles?" Now, this is a perfect occasion to answer. And the answer is, so what? Maybe it does. IQ is partly genetic and yes, biological, so the underrepresentation of Black and Hispanic in tech and leadership roles is in part biological. You don't need to tell that to her face, just spread it around in her circles. Now, I guess this requires a separate video on peer pressure because that's something I have never explained, but in the meantime, the short version is this. Target individuals, not institutions, and gaslight them. That's what they have been doing to us for decades, and it's time to turn the tables against them. Basically, through consistent gossiping and bait and switch, make various top key individuals to start questioning themselves. It's not even hard actually, and I know at least 2 Google employees watch this channel, likely more than 2, so I'm addressing specifically to them. You know how to reach me. I'll gladly explain point by point how to orchestrate gaslighting that would make any normal person question themselves at least a little bit. With leftists who feel pain at words on the screen, that is remarkably easy. Yes, it feels immoral because it's like picking up on the retarded kid at the back of the classroom, except that the retarded kid is the king of all bullies, so not doing something about it is far worse. Thirdly, ramp up the PR disaster. Make them pay at all corners for this. Breitbart is, unsurprisingly, on top of this, already having started a Rebels at Google series of articles with interviews with the minority of normal human beings that work at Google. The series is conducted by Alum Bukhari, a guy who is a tremendous asset for exactly these kinds of things. You see, he is a person of color and has a Muslim-sounding name and some liberal credentials, and a remarkably good understanding of the cultural war. We need to use that more. However, Breitbart can't and shouldn't be the only one doing this. The Daily Wire is also on this issue, but that's still not enough. Get the big channels on YouTube on this, get Fox News on this, and get our narrative into Peter Thiel's circles. He has the resources to do a lot of damage, and I suspect he would if someone would bring this to his attention. Not the issue itself, that I'm sure he knows it already, but the blueprint for fighting back. And of course, if you have stocks in Google, now would be a good time for some speculative stock market wizardry. You all know what I'm talking about. Alright. With all that said, there are also other aspects to keep in mind that others who've spoken about this have missed, at least up until the moment I'm recording this. By the time I publish it, other things may surface. So, for starters, James Damore was a high-ranked chess player. So, for those of you thinking about calling him stupid for doing what he did, please hold your horses. You might be surprised how all this will turn out. Now, I'm not saying he's a super genius, but I am saying that the moment chosen to pull this stunt, the fact that nobody asks who leaked the memo, the fact that the memo sounds Jordan Petersonian, and the day after he gets fired, he goes straight to Jordan Peterson's channel, these things are hardly coincidences. Mind you, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Quite the opposite. I'm glad that he coordinated with other normal people from the wide non-leftist sector. In fact, he did admit as much that Jordan Peterson was an influence, so it's not exactly far-fetched to say that some coordination, even if not deliberate, took place. In fact, it would be fantastic if coordination was not deliberate, because that would mean we are at the point where leftists were in the 1980s, and it only took us 6 years to get there. In the 1980s, after 60 years of subversion, the leftists were at a point where they would no longer need direct coordination. They all simply had a mutual and implicit understanding of where they wanted to go and acted individually to the benefit of their collective worldview. If this is what happened with James Damore, then I am thrilled. Also, Damore should definitely write a book with all of this, especially the unrecorded meetings that clearly violate the law and routinely take place at Google. He should title the book The Google Archipelago. And I'm not even joking. Speaking of which, I should be making a Gulag t-shirt to wear in some of these videos. We'll see. So yeah, that's basically what I had to say on this issue. I didn't go into the substance of the memo because others have already done that. Of course men and women are different, and of course biology plays a role, and of course Google has a moral right to fire anyone they please. But Google cannot have it both ways. That's the difference between normal people, nowadays called conservatives, and mentally retarded people, otherwise known as progressives. Normal people understand that freedoms comes with responsibility and reciprocity. Progressives don't get that. They want the freedom to fire someone for wrong thing, like in this case, but they don't want everyone else to have this freedom. And they also don't like the consequences of their actions and assume no responsibility when the manure hits the fan. And sadly for progressives, it is exactly their own rules that will bite them in the end. If it were after conservatives, there would have never been any equality nonsense nor any unfair dismissal nonsense. But now that those policies are there, they're fair game against progressives too. And Google will learn this the hard way. What I'm hoping is that the non-left will go full force after them in an Alinsky style. It's not just rule number 13 that deals with attacking people, not institutions, that needs to be used. No, it's rules number 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9, but especially 5 and 6. Rule number 5. Ridicule is man's most potent weapon. There is no defense. It's irrational, it's infuriating, it also works as a key pressure point to force the enemy into concessions. This in practice means keeping the pressure up and ridiculing diversity and progressivism at every corner. Do not allow any instance of diversity being uttered with a straight face without at least one ridicule. Make them feel embarrassed. Rule number 6. A good tactic is one your people enjoy. They'll keep doing it without urging and come back to do more. They're doing their thing and will even suggest better ones. And you know what that means. Memes. Memes everywhere. The more, the merrier. The fine Kekistani refugees will take care of that, either contribute or get out of the way. The Keks aren't going to farm themselves. And of course, rule number 4, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. If the rule is that every letter gets a reply, send 30,000 letters. You can kill them with this because no one can possibly obey all of their own rules, and this is both for those inside Google and for the rest of us. Remember, this whole thing started because Google wanted a conversation about diversity, including diversity of opinions. As William F. Buckley used to say, liberals claim to want to give a hearing to other views, but then are shocked and offended to discover that there are other views. Use that against Google. Make them live up to their own book of rules. Now, if I were a lawyer, I would look up suing them for their underrepresentation of white people. Only 56% of Google's employees are white. Drag them through courts and make them live up to their own book of rules. Remember, we didn't start the conflict. I'm only here to propose ways to end it, and the only acceptable end is victory. We conquered YouTube. Time to up the scales and claim the whole thing. And it is doable. And with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. And I guess I'll see you all very soon on Freedom Alternative.